What's up, everybody? It's the Roundtable Sports Podcast. My name is Taylor McLean, back after a little hiatus after the season. It was a long season, and we did really good, so glad to be back talking about football again with you today. We've had news coming out about a bunch of different things, including the quarterback carousel, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. So we'll go through that and talk about what has happened so far, what's left to happen. And with all these different things coming together, it should be exciting to get a look at what these different teams are going to look like going forward. When the offseason started, it was pretty easy to clock a bunch of different teams that were going to look to upgrade their quarterback position in no particular order of how bad they need a quarterback or whatever. I don't feel like the Carolina Panthers have their situation settled, even if they re-sign Sam Darnold. So they've been in the mix for everybody that's kind of available up until this point, but haven't landed on anybody. The Atlanta Falcons kind of seem likely to give Desmond Ridder a chance at this point. Maybe they bring in someone, but I don't really count them as a direct contender. The Indianapolis Colts are obviously in the mix for someone, even though that after another retread season went awry. So they're in the mix to draft someone. They're at spot number 4. And I've felt like they were one of the likelier candidates to trade up into the 1 spot or into the 2 spot, depending on how things go with the Houston Texans, who are also in the mix to draft someone at the 2 spot. So I think they're going to probably get one of the potential 4 first-round graded quarterbacks. For the record, I have it as Bryce Young, CJ Stroud in kind of their own tier, and then Anthony Richardson and Will Levis in another tier. Anthony Richardson, by the way, had a really great day at the combine, measuring out with the biggest hands, and he's huge and he's fast, and all of those things look great. For him, he's kind of a project in the same way that Trey Lance is a project, in that they don't have the reading of the field and just the overall quarterback experience that is necessary to be a successful quarterback just right out of the gates. When it comes to the reading of the field part, the physicality part, they both have in spades. Trey probably has a bigger arm, but I think Anthony is a better runner of the football. It's just they're kind of raw as decision makers, and when it comes to reading defenses, and those are things that you can absolutely get better at in the NFL level. You know, take your preparation to the next level, take your workouts and your preparation when it comes to the film and everything. And that's a leap that everyone has to take. And it's kind of the risk of the draft of which players, in addition to their talent, are going to make that step up in commitment and get themselves to that next level where they could be, and, you know, be in the very tippy top shape they could possibly be in when the season starts. But we've seen with Trey Lance, with a guy that has to rely so much on his legs and can't be as successful as a more classic pocket guy, it does lead to more injuries. And it's kind of a tightrope that I feel like makes the best analogy to say that you need to run some, but you don't need to run too much to get yourself hurt. And that's certainly not an easy path to walk when it comes to running quarterbacks. And really, you have to have these physical skills, number one, to get the leash for your team to allow you to develop those skills, but also to get you by and be able to move the offense during that time while you're getting the skill and while you're developing the experience of having seen these things before. I saw Patrick Mahomes refer to it as his filing cabinet, where, you know, he's talking about blitzes he hasn't seen since his second year, but he still recognizes them and is able to get the protection put into place to keep himself, you know, as upright as he possibly can in these days where the rush from the defense is so super strong because they're getting paid more than they used to in the past, and more players are more willing to play that position and focus on that position as they come up because they know they can get themselves a big bag of money if they can rush the quarterback in a very significant way. And I said that the Carolina Panthers don't have their situation settled at all. They have the ninth pick and could be the end of the quarterbacks for the first round, or the ones that everybody's talking about for the first round as well. So that there's going to be some musical chairs as far as who drafts what. Will be the team that miss out on the guys that could possibly be on the move when it comes to the upper tier guys. The Commanders are obviously going to be in this mix after letting go of Carson Wentz as well. So you can kind of write them down as someone that is going to have, quarterback needs. Throw Las Vegas on there, like I said. Daniel Jones, at the time of this recording, we're still like 30 minutes before the deadline, hasn't done anything yet. And so the Giants may be in the mix, but I think it's likely that we'll see some sort of Daniel Jones deal or franchise tag. Maybe if I talk long enough, we'll be able to update that at the very end of the podcast here. But there's plenty of other things to talk about, including the most recent news that I find the most titillating is the Lamar Jackson getting the non-exclusive franchise tag from the Baltimore Ravens. The difference between the exclusive and the non-exclusive is money. First of all, the non-exclusive, if Lamar Jackson was to sign that, would be less money than the exclusive one, where he can only negotiate with the Ravens. With the exclusive, he can negotiate with other teams, and the Ravens would get 2 first-round picks as compensation if they don't choose to match that contract. It's similar to restricted free agency in the NBA as well. But in the NBA, you do not get any sort of compensation. In the NFL, you get the 2 first-round picks, which I have to think that there may be some negotiating with the Baltimore Ravens if somebody does sign Lamar to a contract. Maybe that's permitted, maybe it's not. I'm not 100% sure on this part, but the reason I bring that up is these quarterbacks have been getting 3 first-round picks, and the quarterbacks that have gotten 3 first-round picks, if they're going to, I would have to think that if the Ravens would have traded him, that they could have gotten 3 first-round picks, had they had him under contract. But, with him being a pending free agent, they have to put the franchise tag on him to get any sort of compensation outside of they would probably get the maximum compensation as far as a compensatory pick in the 3rd round, but obviously they're going to get quite a bit more now if they actually do not match the Lamar Jackson contract that he ends up signing. It's kind of interesting that he doesn't have an agent and they're having so much trouble. I think that's a problem for Lamar, and I think that's one of the reasons that it went down this way is that he doesn't have somebody that can talk to these different teams about what they would offer him, if he was a free agent and whatnot, or even in this scenario where they're going to have to trade 2 first-round picks to get him. An agent can go in there and say, hey, he has other reasons to talk to that GM or to that team, and then they can kind of work in the figures between the contract, who's to stop them once they're in the room together. And with Lamar being his own agent, he can't have those type of talks, and it's harder to negotiate with him when an agent, you can be more blunt with an agent and they'll come back and kind of give Lamar the broad strokes, but you're not saying, we don't think you're worth as much as Deshaun Watson, given what he's done to his face. And obviously a big part of this is that the Cleveland Browns, kind of screwed the pooch when they got desperate for Deshaun Watson to pick them and gave him the fully guaranteed contract, despite everything that had gone on. He's a great player. And I would say that at their peak, I would take Deshaun Watson just because he's a better overall passer and has a little bit better track record just overall, I would say. But that's mainly because of his extended passing ability that he used to show. It didn't show up as much this year, but, he was pretty rusty too, and he got better as the year went along. Please don't watch just like his first game and then assume that's exactly what happened, because it got better, but it was still kind of clunky, and definitely seemed like he was still beating the rust off as the season went along there. So hopefully for the Cleveland Browns sake, and I guess the Texans are rooting against the fact that that could still go either way, but regardless, for Lamar, this definitely made him feel like he was worth that, and he's betting on himself that he's going to be able to go out there and snag that kind of deal himself when he hits the open market. Well, he's not going to get to hit the open market exactly. So maybe a team isn't willing to give him quite exactly what he's looking for, but I got to think he's going to get either that or something close. And it only takes one. It only takes the Washington Commanders to be like, hey, I'm into this. I want to make this happen. Daniel Snyder's last gasp as the owner or whatever. And, it's not like Ron Rivera isn't trying to hold on to his job either. So it's certainly the kind of move that they would make to say they would give him that money and then trade for him. That's a team's draft that I would want to control, because I'm not 100% sure. Roster situation is one Lamar away from being a top 10 team necessarily. I mean, he definitely raises their level, and him and Terry McLaurin and some of the weapons that they have outside of Terry McLaurin would be interesting. And Terry would be one of the best wide receivers that Lamar has had, and especially in some time, even though Terry had disappointed with Wentz, in my estimation. I thought that was more Wentz than I did Scary Terry. And that was the team that Scheffler kind of mentioned like it was a done deal. I don't know that it's going to be quite like that, but the point is, overall, no matter who it is, whether it's one of those teams or one of the teams I mentioned, or I didn't mention the Buccaneers, that they're probably not in the mix money wise and doesn't seem like something they would do, but there's plenty of teams that are going to be quarterback needy. And the point I was making by listing some of them out was to get us to this point where we could be talking about the Ravens or the Packers too, here pretty shortly, as one of the teams that needs a quarterback. But I feel like they're more likely to go with the in-house candidate if they do move on from Aaron Rodgers and Lamar Jackson, with Jordan Love and Tyler Huntley, respectively. I'm not super big on either one of those guys being a starter, but you have to kind of see what you have with both of them, with Tyler Huntley being a restricted free agent and Jordan Love getting long in the tooth with his rookie contract here. The Packers kind of need to see what they have with him. So those moves would actually kind of decrease the amount of likelihood that Baker or Carson Wentz or some of these lower tier options are going to find a starting job. It was already pretty unlikely that Wentz would, but you get my point, that it kind of covers up some of the chairs, and then you throw in the 4 rookies that are likely to start. Maybe Anthony Richardson doesn't start if he goes to a team like Seattle, who just inked up Geno Smith for the next couple of years. So maybe he could sit behind Geno Smith in that instance. But still, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Lamar, what happens to Aaron Rodgers. I got to think that those are the first 2 dominoes that are going to fall before everyone else makes their plans. There are going to be other teams that jump the line and make other signings, but I got to think that Lamar and A-Rod are going to be the first. I really do like Lamar, and I think that he is really dynamic running the ball. And as far as quarterbacks that are incomplete, he is definitely the best. He has not been great when it comes to his accuracy and his pocket passing. It's not been great. And sometimes the game boils down to that, where you have to throw your team into the game and you have to be able to make tight window throws to make that comeback. And historically, Lamar hasn't been able to get that done. He's got it done with his legs sometimes, but sometimes there's just not enough time for that. Like Lamar's not making the 13-second comeback. Lamar's not like when the Rams played Jimmy G, and Jimmy G, when the Rams won the Super Bowl, and Jimmy G got the ball back at the end of the conference championship, and they had plenty of time to drive the ball down there. I didn't believe that Jimmy G was going to make that drive, and I have some questions on whether Lamar has the ability to pass his way through something like that. It's and when you're an incomplete quarterback like Lamar is, he's the best of that version, or like Baker. Baker has holes in his ability to throw it down the field accurately. And when teams are able to take away everything else he does and force him to try and do that one thing that he can't do, he can't do it. And then the team ends up losing because of that deficiency. It's called being flawed. And while I think Lamar is flawed, I'd love to try and figure it out in comparison to making a signing like Derek Carr, like we're going to talk about, or even Geno Smith, that I like that signing better. But still, I think Lamar has that ability to take it to the next level. And I think it's going to take a special offensive mind. And I think it's going to take a certain type of team around him. He's going to need better wide receivers. They just haven't put anything around him wide receiver wise. But then again, I think they knew that their best chance was to run their way through everything versus trying to pass their way through it. But that's also just how the personnel played itself out for the Ravens at this point. As for that other quarterback domino on the Aaron Rodgers side, all we have is that he's in talk with the Jets, which is big news in that he's actually talking to another team and that this could actually happen. It's a big day for the Jets when they have this meeting. It kind of feels like Aaron Rodgers or bust as far as what they're going to do at the quarterback position at this point. And while I think they have improved talent, I don't know that they're 100% just like an A-Rod away from being a true Super Bowl contender, but it looks like they're absolutely ready to find that out and try that out. And clearly they're going to have to rework the contract and give up some picks. The good thing for the Jets is that when you trade the contract like this, part of what you're paying for with those picks will be that his number will likely be lower. You can kind of renegotiate it. And I would think that the Packers would be holding on to some of that money on their cap sheet for a little bit. And that will give the Jets an opportunity to kind of sign people around him and try to put together a contender. It's short-sighted, but when you whiffed on your first round quarterback and you and the number 2 overall pick and the rest of your roster seems kind of ready and seems to have the right kind of rookies and people around him. They'd still need to improve the offensive line a bit because Aaron isn't quite as spry as he used to be in his absolute prime. But I think they have good pieces around him, and I'd be interested to see what the Jets could do with that. And I think it's an interesting opportunity for the coaching staff to prove itself as well. If you can prove you can do this with Aaron Rodgers and that Zach Wilson wasn't your fault and all those things, that gives you a lot more leash for future endeavors, kind of make yourself the coach of the future, if you will, for the Jets too. So move makes sense. We'll see if they actually go through with it and if the Jets are actually able to seal the deal. And that would take a team off the market for the other quarterbacks. That's another team for not Lamar. I'd be interested to see what Lamar could do with this team too. So maybe that's an option if the A-Rod things. I don't know which domino will fall first. Will it be A-Rod or will it be Lamar? Because typically these things fall in order. Like everybody has a plan A and a plan B. And as it turns out, a couple of plan Bs got taken off the market with Derek Carr and Geno Smith both signing contracts. There was a little bit of telegraphing with the Derek Carr signing where we knew Derek Carr had signed a 4-year deal, but we didn't know how much the money was for, which, happens with all these deals. We hear, a huge number, and then you get into Spot Track and you look under the hood of these contracts to see where the money's laid out, how much would they lose if they cut him at this date, et cetera. It's a mess. The NFL salary cap scheme and everything is kind of hard to understand in a given time. And these teams can continually move money around and move it down the road a bit. That's when you hear a team talk about restructuring a contract. That means that they took the salary from that year and turned it into signing bonus, meaning that money counts on prorated amongst however many years are left on the contract. And what that means for the player that gets the contract restructured is that it's more and more prohibitive to cut that person, and they have more and more of their contract guaranteed down the line when they do that, meaning that they're more likely to see the rest of their money in the contract. So when you see your team restructuring, not always great, does mean they're kind of going for it and trying to be competitive. We like that year to year, right? We want to be competitive. No one wants to watch a tanking team or even a mediocre team, in my opinion. I'm not looking, there's nothing more frustrating than like an 8-9 team, it seems, when you have, especially when you have expectations for that team. So when I saw that, so during that time where there wasn't any news on the number, I said, you know what? They had $20 million under the cap that they'd created restructuring a couple of contracts, which for players that you know you're going to keep and you know are good, that's kind of okay, I suppose, but it does create problems down the line and can create problematic extensions, and it's a whole thing. So if you don't understand the NFL salary cap, don't worry. It's not easy for anyone, including the NFL themselves. Each one of those teams has a cap guy that is just super versed in all these things and probably read the agreement over and over and over again to be that guy. But regardless, the point was the Saints started $55 million over the cap, restructured a whole bunch, and had been 20 under at that point. So I said to myself, you know what? If they're able to sign Derek Carr for the 4 for 80, that was my number. I said, you know what? $20 million a year. You can sign some other people on top of that, especially, as some of your dead salary comes off in the next couple of years, as the salary cap goes up, etc. That kind of gives you some value in the contract. But I knew that was going to be nowhere near what Derek Carr signed for. And that meant that the contract was probably not going to be a big value to me overall when I saw it. It ended up being 4 years, $150 million, which, as you can guess, was $70 million over my little estimate of where the value for Derek Carr would lie. So a little bit of an overpay in my estimation. Sometimes in free agency, the cap's going up. So, sometimes in free agency, you have to overpay to get the guy in the building. But yeah, it did strike me a little crazy when I heard the number out loud. It makes a little more sense when they were able to structure it in a way where they give him so much signing bonus up front that he's only going to count $7.2 million against this year's cap. That allows the Saints to be under. They can sign their draft picks and still have a little room to add someone else, or maybe re-sign one of their own guys that are out of the door. Still not a lot of wiggle room as far as what they're doing, but for a team that was $55 million over a cap that had gone up as much as it had ever gone up, still solid, right? But the problem is that the number goes up precipitously after that. So 7.2 million this year means that once again the Saints are kicking their salary cap woes down the line. And once upon a time, Bill Belichick said that sometimes you just the credit card comes due, and it just seems like the bill never comes due for the Saints. They must be really good at the cap and the different machinations of it that it takes to keep sliding themselves underneath these different cap figures to get themselves where they need to go. But the thing is, Derek Carr, 7.2 million this year, but 35 next year. Can't cut him. $52 million in dead money. 45 the next year. Only 17 in dead money, so you could cut him, amortize that over 2 years, and you're kind of out of it. But still, that's a big number. It's a lot of dead cap money, and for a guy that I'm not 100% sure really raises the level that much higher than Andy Dalton. I was reading an article about the expected completion percentage, all these different things that kind of Derek Carr was better than Andy Dalton, but was he this significant number better than Andy Dalton? And yeah, they handled this. They did the good thing with the signing bonus so that you can, spread this out and you can kind of keep yourself going. But they also had to like restructure Taysom Hill. So now Taysom Hill counts like $16 million in dead cap next year if you cut him. So say you don't need Taysom Hill because you have Derek Carr. Best case scenario, you're still booked in for that money. And then you add that on top of what you're paying Derek Carr. And now you're in the bag for 50 million next year for both those guys. And I don't think that either one of those, and we know Taysom isn't an elite guy when it comes to the quarterback position. And I know I keep saying that without backing it up with any numbers, but it's the eye test. He had a lot of air yards, but it was mostly him throwing it up to Devontae Adams, both when he was open and both when he was not. So he deserves some credit for getting the ball to his guy. But there's just this lack of like throws in the intermediate term, and it just seems like there's a lack of accuracy also in the deep ball. But there's also this real propensity to check down, and it feels like there's a lack of arm strength in there, and it feels like there's a lack of processing power when it comes to him making reads and being able to do the upper level things that make quarterbacks elite when it comes to both reading the field and then making tight window throws. So, okay, you've got a guy that is more than a game manager like Andy Dalton. Fine. He's more reliable than Jameis Winston. Fine. That's all great and good, but it feels like to me you're mortgaging a lot for mediocrity. And you're already in the bag for a lot of this, right? You traded what turns out to be the number 10 pick for Chris Olave, who I think is great. But that's still 2 first round picks for Chris Olave. And now you've laid out all this money for Derek Carr, and I'm not 100% sure how far it's going to get you. And then once again, I keep waiting for all of this to come due and there to be just this gigantic Saints collapse. Luckily, they've been drafting well and they've been filling in these positional guys, and they keep kind of churning it out as far as these players go. They seem to have good eye when it comes to draft, as it turns out. But I don't know. This feels like settling, and I'm just not one. I'd rather either be at the very tippy top or in the basement. I'd rather be the Texans at this point than I would be the Saints. Rather not know what I'm getting out of Bryce Young or CJ Stroud and try to advance beyond this quarterback tier that I think Derek Carr is a part of. I think Kirk Cousins is the top of that tier. And then we've got Derek, we've got Ryan Tannehill, Baker Mayfield. Mac Jones is in danger of being on this tier. He needs to break out if he's going to get out of there. Daniel Jones. I guess Geno Smith. Daniel Jones is on the low end. He's one of the worst processors, but he has better physical skills. So he's on here. Tua trying to break out, but his durability skill is really low at this point. So he's got a lot to learn there. And Geno. I think Geno is also on this level. But you know what? Give me Geno before Derek Carr at this point. I'd rather have Geno because I think he gives you a little bit more oomph when it comes to his physical skills and the like. But that's kind of a tough one too. That's a tougher one that I'm more on board with why they did what they did with Geno than I am on the Saints side. But it's also, I guess, part of me being out on David Carr at this point because I just don't see the bravery that it takes to play upper level quarterback. I don't see the processing power, and I think the arm strength isn't overwhelming to be able to make up for that. And then the wheels are kind of lacking as well. He's not set in stone, but he's also not getting away from anybody either. So that's a problem, and it's something he's going to have to deal with, and the Saints are going to have to deal with. And if this was Sean Payton led offense, then I might be into that. And I know the offense hasn't looked completely well because they've had Andy Dalton and Jameis Winston at the helm. But, once again, how much better is Derek Carr than Andy Dalton? Better for sure, but he still has a lot of the same problems. So what is that going to mean? Is he going to be able to elevate the Saints? That's the part I'm dubious of. I mentioned Geno. Now, we don't know the exact figures. They have kind of had some details for us that it's a 3-year, $105 million extension. 75 million of that is the base salary, and then the rest is incentives. We don't know how reachable those incentives are. Sometimes they're, in there because they're unlikely. Sometimes they're in there because they're likely. They're also giving him 52 million in the first year up front, so that means signing bonus. So his numbers should be, low up front like they are. Seattle was 24 million under the cap at this point. So I'm guessing that most of that is going there. But then again, Derek Carr was 7 million. We just haven't seen that. Geno came out and surprised me this year with his play. He was way more put together than he had been in any of his previous stint. He was distributing the ball. He wasn't a high level decision maker. Like, I wouldn't call it elite by any stretch, but he also didn't get paid that way either. He locked up generational wealth for his family, getting 50 million up front. He's going to see more of this 105 million here. Secured a place that he knows he can be successful. I mean, they made the playoffs. I don't know that I considered them a true contender with Geno at the helm, but I mean, at least they know what they're building around for the next couple of years, and they've got all this draft capital coming from the Broncos, who were struggling and went all in, bringing in Sean Payton to try and right the ship. We'll see if that happens. And we're already seeing compensation payoff with it being the number 5 pick overall. And, they can draft Anthony Richardson. They can get the best person to put around Geno or on defense or do whatever they want. And but they have their direction to this point. And with Geno playing better, having enough arm strength to push the ball down the field and running better than I expected. He's still not a top end speed by any means, but he has some physicality to him, and he has enough giddy up to get out of the pocket and get himself some yards. He's just he's just not quite as adept as some of the guys when it comes to his pocket passing and the like, but he's better than some too. Like, I don't think he's as detrimental as it can be when it comes to this tier of guys. And I mentioned that while I was recording that the deadline for the franchise tag was going to come up, and we do have some information on the Daniel Jones part of it. I'm glad I left that to the end. Now, we don't have the firm details on the cap and guarantees or anything as far as this happened, because this just happened. But looks like the initial is a 4-year for $160 million contract. So as I mentioned earlier, that it was the $100 million with Geno and 25 of it was expenses. Well, this is 160 and reportedly has 35 in extension in incentive. So seems like it would max out at 160 million. Hard to say what the incentives are without much more information and whether he would reach it or not. And there is a big difference in that 35 million when you divide it up over 4 years, in what his number was going to be. But it's still pretty impressive that he was able to get this contract, which is actually a double move because simultaneously they were able to franchise tag Saquon Barkley. So likely they were negotiating with both of them and found it to be a little bit more palatable to go the Daniel Jones route. I'm interested to see what the guarantees are here and really how likely it is he's going to, and the cap numbers and all of those things. The incentives usually count towards later seasons as well. So they don't usually figure into the cap number, and then you have to do that arithmetic later. But still, even if the incentives are super duper unlikely, 31 million over the 4 years, depending on how they move it around and everything, and the signing bonus and all that. Sorry, everything's so complicated with the salary cap, but still a handsome chunk of money to give out to Daniel Jones for this season, at least for Saquon Barkley. You can count that as like $6 million in savings on what he was looking to get on the open market between the 16 million he wanted and the 10 million on the franchise tag. So there's some savings there that you can kind of fold into this decision as well, which kind of makes it a twofer, right? It's Daniel Jones getting him under contract, which just 1 year under Daboll, and he looks usable enough that you can get something out of him. Just goes to show you that I was right, that you shouldn't really pass judgment on Daniel Jones until he was away from Jason Garrett. You also have to think that if they just picked up his 5th-year option, how much money they would have saved. But hey, maybe if he got even better, this contract could have been even bigger. And I would bet that the incentives are tied to winning, because if they're able to win with Daniel Jones, then they're going to be happy no matter what the money was at that point. It's hard to think that this is something that was going to happen before it just happened. I mean, it's crazy that on a team that they're not picking up the option, that they were either going to have to franchise him or give him this money. That happened with Josh Jacobs too. Josh got franchise tagged along with Tony Pollard, and now Saquon. That takes a lot of edge off of the running back market and probably made Kareem Hunt a little bit of money now that he's not having to compete with those three guys. Also makes the Cowboys a lot less likely to pick Bijan Robinson with the 26th pick. So who knows with all that. A lot of stuff on the table, but we got some stuff out of the way here today with all these quarterback machinations. Now we've got Daniel Jones locked down. So it's good. The quarterback carousel is some of the dominoes have fallen now, and we're getting a better picture for what's going to happen. So now we'll see what happens with Lamar and A-Rod. Thanks for listening today. I know it's a lot of conjecture and a lot of this is what I think stuff here, but that's where we are in the offseason. Look out for more videos. We got about 3 million hits on the different videos this year over the different platforms. I'm very proud of that, and we're looking to build on that. So hopefully we'll have this podcast and video very soon, as well as some other things down the line here. I'm going to show everybody how to ride 2 scooters at one time sometime soon, and some different things like that. So look forward to that. Like and subscribe if you're on YouTube. Download if you've gotten to this point and haven't done so. That helps me out on the other platforms. And have a great rest of your day.